Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and let your soul...
Unless you become like children, you will in no ways enter the kingdom. Yeah, this is so true. As an arborist, as a certified arborist, I know this is true. In fact, with regard to trees, it's not just bamboo, but all trees. Last Monday, I was in a seminar all day up in Vancouver. I have credentials, and I have to go to seminars for continuing education to keep my... I have several credentials that I have to take classes for, and this was taught by a retired forestry professor from Washington State University or University of Washington. He's retired, and he was teaching on the biology of trees. And we were talking about that. He says, you know, trees, if you stake a tree, and I've known this for years, but he went into a little bit more detail. If you stake a tree, or if you keep a tree or a plant in a greenhouse where it's protected, it will not grow strong. But if you stake a tree, some trees you have to stake early on, but after a year or two you need to take the stakes away, because that as the wind moves against it, it actually strengthens the wood fibers, and it also strengthens the roots. It makes the roots anchored deeply.
Yes.
And it makes, you know, this building here that we're in, inside of it is timber. It's timber framed, and that timber is strong. And the more a tree is subjected to adversities, the tighter the grains will be, and the stronger the wood will be. My house is almost 100 years old, and the timber, they're real 2x4s, real 2 inches by 4 inches, and the grains in that wood, some of them are like 30 rings per inch. Now that may not mean a whole lot, but it took 30 years to grow 1 inch. Now, back 30 years ago when I had a logging company, we were logging timber. And it was not old growth, it was secondary, second or third year growth, or second or third growth. But we were, most of the timber that we were logging was maybe 3 to 5 rings per inch. If you got 7 rings per inch, 5 to 7 rings per inch, it was considered marketable or exportable quality timber. That was the highest quality timber, and you could get a much higher price for it. The wood that my house was built with is all old growth. Most of those fir trees were probably 6, 7, 8, 10 feet in diameter. That's pretty big stuff. And like I say, most of it is 30 rings per inch. 15 to 30 rings per inch, because I've counted them when we've been remodeling. I have been up in the high alpine country in the Cascade Mountains, where I have literally maybe up around 6,000 foot elevation, where those trees, the white bark pines, the alpine hemlocks, mountain hemlocks, alpine firs, those are the species that grow up there the most. I've counted the rings on fallen timber where they were so close to each other, where I had to use a 15 power hand lens and the point of a knife blade to count the rings. Those would have sometimes 50 to 60 rings per inch or more, and a tree that's maybe 2 inches in diameter might be 50 years old. A tree that's this big might be 100 years old. Whereas if it was in the ground, if it was down in this area, it would be this big around. Those trees are very, very strong, because those rings per inch, they have such a short growing season, and there's so much snow, so much wind, and so much cold, they've had to become very strong. And you have trees up there that are this big around that may be 400 years old, whereas down here in the valley they might be 4 or 5 feet in diameter. Those are very strong trees. And that's like what human beings. And you could use them, you may not use them for a fishing pole, but you use them to build a very strong house. I'll give you an example. This gets back to working the Word. When you work the Word of Elohim, you become strong. I'm giving you examples here. I have dropped trees on houses before on purpose. What? Yes. I've had 3 occasions where I've dropped trees on houses. Big trees, 100-foot fir trees, right on a house. The house was going to be torn down because they were going to redevelop it. So for fun, and we were logging these lots out. So for fun, I was able to drop trees on houses. And then I had equipment, log skidders, where we could just pull them out of there. The houses were going to get torn down anyway. And I've also been in windstorms where I have seen trees, the wind blow trees onto houses and cut them in half or cut through them, like if they were a 2-story house, where we've had to use cranes to take the trees out of the houses or off of the houses. I will tell you, the houses that were built with good wood, I'm talking the kind of wood that my house is with, the trees will land, big fir, 100-foot fir trees that are this big around, will land on the tree, on the house, and just sit there. I know, because one time there was an old house, it was 100 years old, and I dropped 3 fir trees on that house. I dropped 2, and these trees were like 50, 75 feet away from the house, so they had a long way to fall. And I dropped it right for the middle of the house. Nothing happened. I dropped another one right across the top of that one. I thought, okay, it weakened it. Nothing happened. I go like, this isn't fun. I want to see that house demolished. So this time I aimed the tree and I dropped it toward the end of the house where it was weak. And it dented it a little bit and did a little bit of damage. But that wood was such good quality, it did not go all the way through. Another time, I dropped a big tree on a house that was probably built in the 50s, and it was built with good wood too, and all I did is punch a few holes through the roof, and branches came through the house. I went inside the house, and some branches came through the roof and into the bathroom, but it didn't damage it. But I've seen houses that were built, let's say from the in the 80s, and little trees came down and just cut the houses right in half because they weren't built out of good wood. I'm not worried about a tree hitting our house. It would just bounce off. I'm not worried about it at all. I've actually had people ask me to inspect their houses before because they had big trees next to their houses and they were concerned about the trees coming down. So I went up into their attic and inspected the wood. Now you're fine. This was built with this old growth timber. You have so many rings per inch. See, that's like us, guys. That's like the man that built his house on the rock. I'm mixing metaphors here, as opposed to the sand. The wind and the rain and the storms beat. It didn't come down because Yeshua was the rock of their salvation.
Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good.